أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه وخاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيد الأولين والآخرين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين اللهم صل على محمد ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. Yesterday, yesterday, or in fact the last two lectures, we have been discussing how Karbala can be or can offer us a model to increase our faith as human beings. Perhaps look at how we can develop our faith very specifically in accordance with the four components which the first Imam said of yaqeen, if you remember, certainty, and how we question our identity to bring this certainty, the idea of striving or jihad, the idea of justice, the idea of abstaining from worldly temptations. Then we can say to ourselves that we have a rather complete faith. And when one or two or three of those components are missing, then we can at least examine our own lives and say, perhaps I'm going wrong here, or perhaps I'm going right here. And the last two lectures have been quite universal. They're applicable to all Muslims, or even those outside of the faith. But this lecture, inshallah, what I want to focus on is how Karbala specifically affects our understanding of faith as Shia Muslims. That means when we, for example, as I said in the first lecture, when we cry and we beat our chests, and of course these are noble institutions that we have, do these things increase our faith? And when we cry, we expect an increase in our iman. We expect to be moving forward towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is fine. But as I also said, that there are 5 or 10 other lenses by which we can look at this faith. Because if we cry, but perhaps we are not doing amr bil ma'ruf and nahi al munkar in the society, then can we say that our faith is complete as Shia Muslims? Can we say that Karbala is positively impacting us? And you can see that it's very important territory, because our perception of our existence is based on our influences, our environment, and our upbringing. And I did point to yesterday that fitra, as one of the sources that influences us, is a crucial element by which we can increase our faith. So, of course, we are born with that inclination of God and righteousness, but then how that's manipulated, how that's molded, who guides us, all plays a very crucial role. And I want to come on to this second source now, of a source of morality, or a source, if you like, that affects the way we develop our faith, and that is called charisma, or you can say an influential figure. And it's the same in Western ethics or ilmul akhlaq, Islamic ethics. It doesn't matter, there's no difference here. Because for somebody to be attracted to morality, to be attracted to cultivating faith, he or she, generally speaking, requires some attractive or influential figure. So if you notice, we always say that the Quran and the Sunnah are the foundation of Islam. The Quran as revelation. So we are then saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words are encapsulated in this book. But we also say Sunnah. So we also say the aqwal, the statements, the af'al, the actions, and the taqrir, the tacit approval of the Prophet and the Imams also influence us, don't they? So we must embody the Prophet. We must embody the character of the Prophet in everything that we do. Everything from the way we eat, to the way we sit, to the way we lead our life, to the way we build our relationships. So a charismatic figure or an influential figure affects how we develop our faith. But then, of course, this depends on our perception of that figure. It depends on our understanding of who the Prophet was. So I gave an example yesterday, I think, where I said that Henry Stubb looked at Imam alayhi salam as a very practical figure. He said that the first Imam was somebody that did not delve too much into theoretical things, but delved into practical problems and gave practical answers. And therefore, when he was struck in Masjid al-Kufa and people found out that he was dying, they said, who is going to look after orphans and widows? So their perception of the first Imam was a practical man with the grassroots. So then when you want to follow Imam Ali alayhi salam, you would say, right, now I should look after orphans and widows. The same thing with Karbala. What is our perception of al-Husayn alayhi salam? How does he impact our life on a day-to-day basis? And I said in the first lecture, our perception so far has been that Imam Hussein has been a tragic hero. That's basically what it has been. It's very much akin to a Shakespeare play. So all of you, I'm sure, or the children here, when they go to school and they study Shakespeare, they see Othello and Macbeth and all of these very interesting figures, actually, that Shakespeare wrote about. They're tragic heroes, basically. So we also look at al-Husayn in that way. Now, there is an element of truth there, but it's only one element of truth. So now the question is, how does Karbala affect our Shia identity? How does it directly affect our development of faith? And we can only answer that when we look at the dynamics of Karbala through the idea of this charisma, of the influential figure in Karbala. And there were two. There was Yazid ibn Muawiyah on one side, and there was al-Husayn on the other. Both are charismatic or influential figures in their own right. Forget whether they're positive or negative at the moment. Yazid ibn Muawiyah had a particular influence over the people close to him, over Ibn Ziyad, Umar ibn Sa'd, whoever. And he tried to get some sway over the people. And al-Husayn the same. People may have liked al-Husayn, people may have believed in God, that's fine. But ultimately, the charisma of al-Husayn was there. But how did people receive the charisma and the influence or the actions or the sunnah of al-Husayn? And the reason why a prophet or a charismatic figure is so crucial to influencing faith, it is because that person can break or cement tradition. So he can take Yazid. He attempted to break the prophetic tradition and cement the Umayyad tradition, or perhaps an immoral worldview. Al-Husayn alayhi salam tried to break the Umayyad tradition and remind us all of the prophetic tradition. An influential figure is so important that he can make or break somebody's perception of faith. And we see that in the Kufan people, because they were in the middle. They didn't know which way to go, whether to truly go and follow up on al-Husayn's call, or whether to just say that, yeah, faith is something of the heart and I'm not going to act upon it. So you can imagine that when we as Shia Muslims at least, or you can say Muslims, when we say that this sunnah is a very important thing in our religion, it's not just important in our religion and our derivation of law, it's central to our behavior and the way we develop faith and the way we perceive who this person is. Depending on our perception, we will act on that way. So if we have viewed al-Husayn up until now as a tragic hero, then we may be very satisfied with crying and matam, but we may not accomplish the other 3 or 4 components of faith which Imam Ali said in Nahj al-Balagha. So you can see how crucial that is. And some of the brothers yesterday, when they were asking questions that is the Muslim community active enough? Are scholars active enough, for example? Depends on really what our perception of our figures has been so far, and whether we want to construct new paradigms of who they were. And in fact, did they regard themselves as the way we regard them now? That's a very big question. Our dear Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Quran says that he is rahmatul lil alameen, that he is a mercy to the world, or he is uswatul hasana, he is the best example. These are very universal kind of features of the Prophet. In fact, Allah tells the Prophet in Surah Al-Qalam verse 4, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Innaka la'ala khuluqin azim. Indeed, you have a mighty disposition or a mighty character, which means a central feature of the Prophet was his akhlaq, as we all know, as we are all taught. So it means people were attracted to him and people developed iman based on their understanding of the akhlaq of the Prophet and nothing more. We know that the Prophet started to preach La ilaha illallah after his akhlaqi traits were known to society. So the central features of attraction for people were his akhlaq. So he was quite a universal character. And perhaps he regarded himself as universal as well. That he wasn't, an example is the concept of ummah, which arguably has become very narrow today. Because ummah, as perhaps some of you know, in that society, in the Meccan and especially Medinan society, meant all the people that were under the Prophet or within the Prophet society. Jews and Christians, even polytheists, they were part of the ummah of the Prophet. Ummah, the nation, the people of that society. Every one of them tried to look after each other. The concept of ummah today now is basically only Muslim, or maybe Shia Muslim, or more specific than that. So you can see how far we have gone in terms of our understanding of who the Prophet or an Imam was, and the way we are perceiving him, whether it is more advanced or more restricted. It's a very big question to pose ourselves. This, therefore, affects the way we develop Iman. Because if we see, or if we say that a holy figure, such as a Prophet or Imam, is only relevant to Shia Muslims, then he will only be relevant to Shia Muslims. And this is why the whole series of these lectures is built on trying to universalize or recontextualize Karbala. And the other reason I say this is, in Western ethics, you may say that a Prophet or Imam is not very relevant. It is true. Generally speaking, go to universities. If you learn ethics or you learn philosophy, you're not going to learn about Jesus or Muhammad, peace be upon him, or Yusuf alayhi salam. They don't really carry any kind of role. But Aristotle and Kant carry very big influence within Western ethics. Now the question is that, are Aristotle and Kant holy figures? Are they prophets? Well, to some degree they are, yes. Because according to Western ethics, that's how basically they're regarded. They are regarded as the sources of morality, as the sources of faith for Western non-Muslims or Western Muslims, whoever you want to say, takes his figures very seriously. They are almost regarded as prophetic. Aristotle's works is regarded as the foundation, pretty much, for Western ethics. So that means who occupies that charismatic place is very crucial. And it's really just a matter of terminology at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what you want to say. For Western people, they wouldn't like to use the term holy figures, but they are holy figures. For us, the Prophet and Imams, they are holy figures, but we have looked at them rather differently. Because we don't seem to say that the works and the thoughts of the Imams, for example, are universal. So, letter 53, which I said before, of Imam alayhi Islam, is not regarded as a universal letter for human beings. It's regarded as a letter which was given to Malik al-Ashtar, and that letter is only relevant in the Shia context. Karbala thus far has been relevant only in the Shia context. And as I said, that's up to us. It's up to us how universal we want to make our figures. And if we make them universal, then their thoughts become universal. I recently, thankfully to Allah, had to write a small column or article for the Essex Chronicle, sort of where I live. And it was about the recession and about student fees. And I specifically mentioned letter 53 in a newspaper, basically, which is talking, any newspaper, council issues and local issues. And I wrote specifically how letter 53 could be relevant to the average student, for example, or could be relevant to the local council or politician. It all depends what lens we are using. And that, in turn, affects the way we apply our faith. Because if I then say to myself, I'm going to follow letter 53 and the way that I run my Jamaat or community or school or government is going to be, as Imam Ali says, that I'm appointing morally trustworthy people, or before I decide to say that I am their leader, and Imam Ali hates that statement, says never say that, because you are under the governorship, or you are under the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have been given leadership as a test. Imagine if we could develop leadership frameworks from this letter and apply it in a more international level. And that's again up to us. And again that affects the way we go about our lives in society as Shia Muslims. Salawat, please. The window that I want to use in a way to develop a different, a new paradigm in the way that we can develop faith is actually given by our fifth Imam. And our fifth Imam, actually, Sheikh Mufid describes him as saying that the fifth Imam was relevant to the Khasa and the Amma, these usual phrases. That Khasa meaning generally it's interpreted as Shias, and the Amma as general people beyond that, or as non-Shias. Even as early as Sheikh Mufid, you have some kind of understanding that the fifth Imam was relevant beyond his own community and beyond his own context. And he was educated in different kinds of sciences as well. So again, you find we do have some indications within our books and within our hadith or biographical collections of how the Imams are regarded. But I want to go a bit deeper than that. How did the fifth Imam alayhi salam regard Iman, regard faith? What did he define faith as? How did he, when he was talking to Shia Muslims or the community, when he was talking about faith, how did he try to define it? There are three hadith I want to share with you, probably ascending in authenticity actually, which I will give you the references for. But they're nice hadith because it makes us think, okay? And I'll also try to refer back to the Quran as well. This one is in Al-Kafi volume 2, page 24, hadith number 2. And the fifth Imam says, Al-Iman ikrarun wa amalun. That faith is, ikrar is kind of declaration or recitation, wa amalun, action or deed. Okay? Faith is declaration and action or deed. Wa islamu ikrarun bila amal. That Islam is declaration but without the deed. Okay, this is how he defined Iman. That Iman seemed to imply or show that it was a complete combination of submitting to Allah from the tongue and submitting to Allah from one's body, from one's deeds and actions. And again, you might obviously have heard this distinction between Muslim and Mu'min, that a Mu'min appears to be somebody that's very complete in his or her faith, in his action and in his what he recites. But a Muslim can be somebody that says, I believe in Allah, but then may drink alcohol or miss his salah or whatever it is. Again, you find that faith appears, both for the Shia Muslim and Muslim in general, a complete package. And we see this in the Quran, because in Surah Al-Hujurat, the Prophet is told to say to the Arabs, and the Arabs say, we submit, O Prophet, we submit to you. We submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Prophet is told to say to them, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. That faith has not entered in all of your hearts. It has not entered. Again, we find this kind of distinction, which the Prophet understands, and which the Prophet is telling people, that while you recite or say in front of me, there doesn't seem to be anything in here. There doesn't seem to be a feeling. There doesn't seem to be a deep understanding and recognition and true acceptance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or what you believe in. Now we're getting one step closer to defining, at least within the Shia context and Muslim context, what faith means. Then we come to another hadith which really clarifies this. And this is in Tuhaf al-Uqul, Wasal Shia, as well as Biharul Anwar. Fifth Imam says, he says, Innal imana yusharikul Islam. That indeed faith partners Islam. Okay? Wala yusharikuhul Islam. Innal imana ma wakara fi qulub. But Islam doesn't partner it. Okay? Faith partners Islam, but Islam doesn't partner it. Which again reflects from the previous hadith. He says that faith is a concern of the heart. What we have been saying. Faith is something to do with the deep recesses of somebody's soul and somebody's existence. This is what I've been mentioning in the last two lectures. The notion of questioning and reflecting to cultivate true Iman. And he continues, Wal Islama ma alayhi al manakihu wal mawarithu wa haqnud dima. Islam concerns concerns marriage, inheritance, and stopping dima, stopping blood or bloodshed. That's what Islam is about. The prescriptions and the obligations to do or not to do something. Wal iman yashrukul Islam. Faith is a part of Islam. Okay? Wal Islam la yashrukul iman. But Islam does not partner faith. Again showing that when one is faithful, one automatically is a Muslim. One would automatically perform the nikah or do the inheritance in the right way or fulfill the legal conditions necessarily. But one who is a Muslim may not have a true sense of what faith is and of trusting God and of fulfilling what he wants and emulating his attributes. Therefore, in order for us to be Shia Muslims, the notion is that our faith must try to encompass both things. And if it doesn't, then we are only ascending or remaining at one particular level of existence. Salawat, please. Now we come to a very specific hadith. Now in my mind, this is the most authentic one, okay? This is reported by As-Saduq, Sheikh Tusi, as well as later sources. And I also found out that this hadith is quoted again by the 5th Imam, but is also quoted later by the 11th Imam, which I found very surprising. Because sometimes hadith may not always be repeated by later Imams. So you find a continuity in thought and tradition from the 5th to the 11th. And I found this, as I said, in early and later sources. And the reason why this hadith, to my mind, is perhaps more important than the last two, especially in the Shia context, because here we have a specific address by the 5th Imam to Shias, specifically to Shias, about defining who a Shia is. Who is a Shia? Okay? Now, we often define Shia in two ways. One is in the theological context, in terms of wilaya. That a Shia is a person that does wilaya of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Fine. He's a person that testifies to the first Imam as the rightful successor of the Prophet. No problem. Okay? And we also define it sometimes in terms of what a Shia person does, like wearing a ring or praying a certain amount of rakat or number of rakats. So that is a Shia person. Rarely have I heard, at least, and you may wish to correct me, but in growing up, I have rarely heard what actions and deeds a Shia person must do in terms of his faith and his moral character to make him a Shia. What should a Shia person do? What differentiates him with other people? Why should we follow Imam Ali anyway? Because I may say I follow Imam Ali, but I may not embody his ideals and values. So does that mean I'm a Shia now? It's a very big question. And if somebody follows the ideals of Ali ibn Abi Talib, but is not aware of Ali ibn Abi Talib, is he following the ideals of Shi'ism? And the reason I pose you these questions is because of this hadith. And this is what the 5th Imam says. It's a rather long one, so I'll just say it in English. He says, our followers, the Shia, are only those who fear and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their signs are modesty, piety, fulfillment of trusts, always referring to or trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fasting, offering prayers, piety to their parents, subhanallah, aiding their neighbors, especially the poor, the destitute, the indebted, and the orphans, speaking truth, reciting the Quran, and avoiding mentioning people except for praising. That means not to backbite. In addition, they are the most trustful people of their tribes. That is a Shia person. And I say this with more conviction, and people may agree, disagree with authenticity. In my view, this is quite an authentic hadith. And the 5th Imam is addressing this to Shias. And this is continued on by the 11th Imam. And this reflects the character of none other than our first Imam, who will look after our orphans and widows. That's a Shia person. A Shia person is somebody that does not make a distinction between religion, sect, and culture and race. Did we notice that you only look after a Shia person or this type of person or this person? No. You aid your neighbors wherever they are. You help orphans wherever they are. Doesn't matter. That is the universal message of Shi'ism and gives us a window of contextualizing the teachings, at least going back to Imam Ali and by the later Imams, to show that Karbala and those associated with Karbala can be a paradigm to develop a more universal faith associated with Shi'ism. Now, as of yet, we don't seem to look at the faith in that way. We often want to say that a person that is a Shia has to abide by 1, 2, and 3, and that is fine, I accept that. There's overwhelming evidence to show that Imam Ali was a rightful successor. There's no issue with that. And nobody's saying to remove that. The issue is, if he was selected, why was he selected? Why? What's the point? Just because the Prophet says so? No, not just because the Prophet says so. Because there's a reason why. If the Prophet is saying something, it must be in accordance with my aql. Why should I trust the Prophet? Why? And Shia theologians say, because we can discover akhlaq. Because we can recognize when somebody is trustworthy. We can recognize when somebody is telling the truth. I follow the Prophet because this person is not going to change in my business dealings. And you all know this. This is why people started to like the Prophet. Because they recognized in themselves that, hold on a second, what he's doing is right. So if what he's doing is right, I can trust him. So if the Prophet is saying, I'm selecting Imam Ali Islam, it's because he's saying, you can trust him. Because I'm going to entrust him to you and he's going to look after your orphans and widows. There's no point in saying we follow blindly. The Quran says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تَفَكُّرُونَ all the time. Because in order for us to say we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to first of all believe He's going to tell us the truth. We have to believe He's a just God. We have to believe He's going to fulfill our promises to us. Isn't it? That's what goes in our mind. In the same way, we follow the Prophet. Why? Because we think He's Uswatul Hasana. He's the best example. We don't follow Him in any other case. Because he deserves that position. So in the same way, when we say we are Shias, it is because we should fulfill the values of Imam Ali alayhi salam. That's the reason why he was appointed as the successor of the Prophet. Because he embodied the values of the Prophet. He reflected the knowledge of the Prophet and the akhlaq of the Prophet. So now it tells us, and it gives us some very interesting windows. One is, who is a Shia? And in a way, I've answered that one who does these things, actually, that is a Shia person. Now we get a more complete understanding of our faith. Number two, and I gave the example of the British poets and philosophers, when they started to be attracted to al-Husayn, when Gandhi started to be attracted to al-Husayn, he was applying the values of al-Husayn alayhi salam. That's what he was doing. So now, do you say he's a follower of al-Husayn? Well, I'm sure some people would say yes, and maybe some would say no, depending on whether you want to look at it theologically, whether you want to look at it through history, whether you want to look at it through ethics. Or you can combine all of them. But I'm posing you these questions because there seems to be more at stake as to what a Shia person is and does for himself and for humanity. Salawat. I don't know, a couple of minutes, a bit more, yeah. There's one final thing I wanted to mention, which I guess I'll mention, I have some minutes left. If we understand faith in this way, and we're looking at al-Husayn in perhaps a universal way, and at least the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt in this way, how can we now translate the teachings of these so-called holy figures? Because I think they were not just holy, they were practical figures and intellectual figures and scholarly figures. How can we make these relevant to the world at large? There's one thing I want to quote to you. In international law, salawat please, sorry. About 8 years ago, the term heritage was actually changed. Heritage or turath, but in international law, if you want to say that some site deserves, like UNESCO heritage mark, or this place is a mark of heritage, people and lawyers and politicians used to say that heritage meant the architecture and the land and the buildings of a particular country. So like this building of Mahfil Ali, or some university in London, or London Eye, or the Parliament, or Westminster, that would be the heritage of a country. That's how they used to see what heritage meant. But in 2003, they actually changed the definition, okay? And they made or constructed the intangible heritage convention. And they said that this term heritage now needs to be changed because they realized that a culture and a civilization and religion has more than buildings, has more than architecture. It has, and I'll quote, it has traditions or living expressions inherited from ancestors, passed on to descendants, such as oral traditions, a hadith basically, okay? Such as performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge, and practices concerning nature and the universe of the knowledge, and skills to produce traditional crafts. That's now what heritage is. Now you have this distinction between tangible heritage, which is land and buildings and architecture, and intangible heritage, which is things you can't see or touch, but things which you can observe within society, like maybe our commemorations. Our commemorations, like Majalis and Maktal, would now be known as the intangible heritage of a country or group. It means now people are beginning to recognize the worth of holy figures and religious rituals and religious figures. Now let us think 100 years in advance, okay? Let us think 100 years in advance. Why can't we contextualize the works of Zainul Abidin al-Islam or Imam Ali or Karbala and now make it relevant within the international society? Because it is going that way. We're living in this world. We're not living within our own cocoons anymore. We're living in a very globalized and pluralized world. So whatever we do has a repercussion within another society. We can use this window within international law to say that no, the thoughts of these so-called holy figures, or figures that you term as holy, have actually relevance beyond your immediate context. And just as Aristotle and Kant have now become prophetic figures for humanity almost, why can't Zain al-Abidin or Ali ibn Abi Talib have that same position? And we have proof of that anyway, as I've shown you, through the English Enlightenment. It therefore tells us that these figures can be relevant in developing Iman not just to Shias, but to human beings. Now we can get into the mind perhaps of our dear Prophet. When he was in a polytheistic society, how on earth did he shift a society which was worshipping idols to then worshipping one God? That's the eternal challenge for us. If we can do that, then inshallah we would have continued the prophetic message and continued on the words of al-Husayn. For what did he say to Muhammad ibn Hanafiya? He said, I am only refusing to give allegiance to Yazid to rectify the affairs of the ummah of my grandfather and my father. Jazakallah for listening, and open it up to Q&A. Allahumma salli ala.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for your lecture. You were talking about our commemorations of Imam Hussein as an institution or a paradigm.
Yeah.
Do you feel it's overtaken the other lenses that we also require as part of our faith? I'll just give you an example. In Iraq, the outpourings of affection and commemoration for our imams after 2003 is very evident. However, you can also see they are the same people who actually have inverted Imam Ali's sort of history in Iraq. So, whereas Imam Ali stood for against corruption and for services to the orphans, in fact, it's inverted, and they have no services, and it's probably one of the most corrupt countries in that region. How do we make that link? These are the same people who profess and take part in this commemoration with such gusto. And you can apply it to lots of Shiite societies, whereas outwardly they are commemorating and they've got this faith, but the other aspects of faith are so lacking that it just really questions whether or not this actual commemoration is actually undermining the rest of our faith rather than actually strengthening it.
Jazakallah. Yes, in many respects I agree with you, and I think I gave a report in the first lecture where BBC News actually observed what was happening around the world of how Shias are commemorating, and that's what they saw. And as I've said, that the institution of Azadar is a noble one, But when it does overtake or suppress the underlying messages, it becomes problematic. And I do think in many respects, yes. That's why I guess I'm giving this series. I do, in many respects, believe that it has, as you have said, overtaken the other lenses. So now when we want to start to extract the ethical messages, it becomes difficult because we've got used to satisfying our iman through the crying only, and then we feel that happy feeling, I've done something. So in many respects, yes, I agree with you. And how we achieve that balance is, again, I think, trying to balance the two, that the commemorations and the messages, and also to identify which of the rituals are cultural and which of the rituals are religious. Yes.
Any more questions?
Thank you, Sheikh. See, to be able to apply what you just mentioned, that the lessons from our imams and all that, practically, I think we need to increase the literacy in our Muslim society, make them, rather than apply it blindly or traditionally, and the gatherings that we have on Muharram and Ramadan, more or less they are on a kind of a traditional basis, and okay, there are lecturers who go around, but it's the same repetition every time. Yours lectures are actually eye-opening, for example, for me at least. And something like, if they were discussed like these by Zakirs and Zakiras, and then becomes a thinking process for the Ummah, that way probably could be the start of how the Muslims are then represented, or the other communities take Muslims as they become acceptable within the society, that they have something to contribute. Because at the moment, I mean, the Muslims' whole the representation has become so bad because of certain behavior and irrational behavior and all that nobody wants to listen to Muslims, and then how are we then going to be able to make contribution towards the politics, towards the social upbringing and all that? It's just a comment. I don't know if you want to further that into it.
Okay, Jazakallah for the comment. It's obviously a big question, a big comment, and it's almost like an eternal one. I don't always like to be too hard, sort of Muslims or Shia Muslims. Obviously, there are things that we do positively, and we do have, so even our models of cleanliness and these sort of things is actually very good, to be honest, at least in terms of our personal sort of fit and things like that. But within the wider society, yes, I think that we have to increase our number of intellectual sciences. That's one big thing. So the arts and humanities, sort of literature and poetry and political philosophy, I think we are not very advanced in, even in terms of science as well. And that's one thing where we are not seem to be making more of an impact within the wider society. And the second thing, I think that we should always be critical of how we are always looking at our religious interpretation. And one other thing is, for example, we live in Britain, okay, and we have very unique challenges. People who go to university either sometimes face depression, loneliness, peer pressure, drugs, this kind of lifestyle and all that. Now, nobody's giving guidance to them. Nobody. So it requires scholars, or it requires scholarship to now think, right, we have some practical problems here. So I have to now devote my energy, not just in theoretical things, but now in practical things. And it requires, I think, support for scholars here to do that. I think this idea that scholars everywhere in the world and each person can give a guidance from another region is becoming very difficult now, because you have to feel and experience the issues in society and then the person can give guidance. So I think the other part of the answer is supporting scholars here and trying to develop scholars here that can give some helpful solutions and try to help people here and practice and focus on our issues, inshallah.
Any more questions?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I just had a quick question. But went through my mind. It's not that much of a complex question, but it did give me some doubts. You mentioned that what a role a Shia has in this, in the society of ours in this West. But should we focus on the non-Muslims, on the non-believers, or on the Christians, on the Jews, instead of our religion, Islam itself, where it has roots, where there are so many different sects of Islam, like Sunnis, Wahhabis, and all that kind of stuff, where there are people that are within our own religion who go against our basic beliefs. Shouldn't our focus be on them instead of aiming straight to the West in general?
Okay, Jazakallah for the question. It really depends on where you live, literally. Where you live, what your context is, which neighborhood you live, and what problems you're going through. So in London, for example, what kind of neighbors are here and what do we owe to them and what problems do we face? In maybe a Middle Eastern country, an African country, it might be different and you might have other religious sects playing a role. So I would answer the question by saying, what is your priority at the moment? And who can you directly impact? This is a big thing. And the second thing is, as you saw from the hadith, that there doesn't seem to be too much of a distinction between religion or non-religion. But again, if you see that there are needy, for example, Shia Muslims who are not being taken care of, then of course you owe a primary duty to them, no doubt. And if you see, for example, that maybe Islam is easily being corrupted, as you said, by Wahhabis or a different kind of interpretation, or there seems to be an attack like Islamophobia, okay? Then, again, that is something to rectify. But these kind of things are practical things. They're judgments usually made by the community depending on their resources and depending on who's close to them and what they can impact. Yeah, sure.
Any more questions?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I have a somewhat heretical question. Perhaps you can permit me to ask it and then chastise me for it later. You touched on this very briefly. You said, and I was quite impressed that you said that, at least for some people, Kant was a prophet. He had he was prophetic. And I think, and this is the heretical part, I think I'd agree with that assessment. That he's had a kind of, his impact on the world has had a quality that you could describe as prophetic. It's profound and ongoing. So my question is that, given the importance of figures like Kant and their work for the world, do you think it's important for us as Muslims to really study them critically in order to understand our own place in the world and our spiritual sources?
Yes, in one word. Because one, I'm saying this not just rationally, but even through hadith. Rationally, yes, all knowledge is beneficial, but even you take Imam Ali alayhi salam, who basically said that, always try to gain knowledge, even if it is from a non-Muslim, for example, and there are various similar hadith like that. And the Quran seems to be very universal in instructing us to gain knowledge all the time. And the Prophet certainly didn't prohibit where you get the knowledge from. So yes, if any figure of philosophy is knowledgeable and can help us, then why not? And anyway, at least I remember some of my teachers who are Iranian, in the Hausa, they used to often talk about Kant, study them, apply their principles or compare them to Usul al-Fiqh. And I think that's quite a common occurrence within reformist Muslim scholarship, sometimes in Iran, sometimes in other parts of the world. So it does actually happen anyway. And people do study him and make a link. And there are also links you can make between Kant and Islam. I forget the title of the book, but there is a book which deals with Kant's awareness or relationship with Islam, as well as other Enlightenment figures. And in one of his latter works, Metaphysics of Morals, he is aware of he says Muhammad and religion. So he's actually aware of Islam and its principles as well. So it'd be also interesting to see whether he learnt anything or whether there was some kind of exchange as well. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Brothers and sisters, so far we have discussed a number of martyrs, but we have not seen the anguish of Lady Zainab alayhi salam. What was going through her mind? What was going through the sister of al-Husayn alayhi salam as she saw all of these martyrs and tragedies happening around her? If you remember, when Yazid's men took her to Kufa and the rest of the women and children, she said to the people of Kufa, "O people of Kufa, woe upon you! Do you realize which piece of Muhammad's heart you have cut, which pledge you have broken, whose blood you have shed, and whose honor you have dishonored? You have certainly committed such a crime, because of which the sky may fall down on the earth may crack, and the mountains crumble to pieces. By killing your Imam, you have committed a major evil act of rebellious behavior and heedlessness towards dignity. In view of all of these acts, would you wonder if the blood should rain down from the sky, that the sky should even cry blood? In any case, you should know that your punishment in the Akhirah will be very severe. At that juncture, there will be no one to help you." But brothers and sisters, who was there to help Lady Zainab bear these tragedies? Al-Husayn he will be martyred very soon. But who did Lady Zainab lose? She lost Own and Muhammad. It is reported on the day of Ashura that when she started to clean Own and Muhammad and put on their garments, she started to cry. For both her and her husband were now seeing where their children would go, or these young men or young ones would go. When Umar ibn Asad saw the two children riding into battle, he said, "What love Zainab must have for her brother to have sent the light of her eyes to the battlefield. Look at what Zainab is going to lose." The two, Own and Muhammad, fought bravely. And finally Muhammad was struck down. Own came to his dying brother, taking him into his lap, and he said, "Oh brother, don't cry. I too will soon follow." Can we imagine siblings saying that to each other? Own continued to fight until he too was struck down and he departed. Weeping and overcome by grief, these dear young ones were just left there. Lady Zainab alayhi salam was grieving. Could she show her grief? Did she have to be strong for the rest of the camp of al-Husayn alayhi salam? For when Zainab told the people of Kufa what they did, what was going through her heart? Her children, her family, the fact that the Imam had died. This was Lady Zainab alayhi salam's anguish. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate the shuhada of Karbala. Surah Al-Fatiha.